When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we will be continuing on our reread of A Game of Thrones, and we will be doing Tyrion VI. And again, another kind of shorter chapter, which is really weird because I've been rereading A Feast for Crows in my own spare time, and like every chapter is like 20 pages, and this one I think is like 7. But we're going to be picking up with Tyrion right after the last Catelyn chapter. Again, just a refresher, Tyrion is now free, right? He's left the Eyrie, but he has an almost an even as dangerous task. He has to make it all the way back to the Riverlands, somehow has to make it all the way back through the mountains when they barely made it to the Eyrie as it is. And he just has Bronn this time. There's not an entire party of people like when Catelyn came up. So yeah, we're in a very risky situation. So let's get into it, starting on page 452. Chapter starts with Tyrion noting they had taken shelter off of the pass under some dead trees. Tyrion currently was looking for firewood, examining one piece on the ground. He asked Bronn if this will do, as he had never started his fires. Morik had. Again, just showing how Tyrion, again, up to this point, is still someone that has really not had to have much survival skills when it comes to actual, like, physical labor type things. And again, that he always had servants to do those things. So it's a really nice dynamic between Tyrion and Bronn, who Bronn is definitely like lower class, someone that is very cutthroat. He's had to do all of these things, and just kind of establishing that and that dynamic within the first page. But Bronn is horrified to hear this, and not because Tyrion doesn't know how to start a fire, but it's because, why are you wanting to start a fire, right? We're trying to not die. We don't want to bring the mountain clans on us. Again, he asks Tyrion if he is so hungry to die, or if he has lost his sense. Again, because the fire is going to draw them all to him. And that Bronn means to survive this journey. Tyrion asks Bronn how he thinks they are going to get away. How are they going to survive, right? They're 2 people against the entire mountain clans, and even the Shadow Cats as well. That's not even really brought up here. How are they going to do that? And all the while, again, Tyrion continues to bend to collect wood, noting how tired he is. They've been riding all day. Again, Lysa wanted them out of the Eyrie very quickly, so they had to go all the way down the mountain and then, you know, going through the Bloody Gate, and now they're finally getting some shelter. And what I find is really interesting is that Lyn Corbray is the one that actually escorts him out, and he tells him never to return. It's kind of like, do you think Tyrion came here by choice? It's not like Tyrion wanted to be here, and he's obviously not going to come back. So, you know, thought that was a nice little interesting note that we have there. Bronn notes that they have no chance fighting their way back, but 2 can make up more ground than 10. If they ride hard and fast by night and hole up during the day, they may make the Riverlands. The longer they stay up here, the worse he feels. Which, again, brings up an interesting, like, point, is that traveling at night in such bad terrain, it's not a great idea. Tyrion's gonna, like, think about this and talk about this later on, but this is not a great plan. Yes, again, it probably is the most likely thing to succeed given what Bronn thinks their available options are. But yeah, if one of their horses dies, they're absolutely screwed. And it's not like that isn't, you know, a big possibility. Think about when they came up during the day, right? With Catelyn and that whole party, they also had horses dying because of broken legs and things of that nature. So this seems very unlikely to work, but it is probably the best option, again, because you can't fight your way out of this. That'll get us into page 453. Also, while we're transitioning to the next page, let me know how you guys like the new reread thumbnails. If you like them, don't like them, let me know. But moving into page 453, Bronn continues, they will make little noise and light no fires. And Tyrion is kind of amused by this and tells him to forgive him if he does not linger to bury him. Because again, I think Tyrion completely understands that this is not going to work. There's only one way they're going to get out of this, and it's going to be by talking their way through it, right? Having some reason that the mountain clans don't kill them, or else they're going to kill themselves. Bronn says, you planned to outlive me, with a grin showing the half-broken tooth from, again, the fighting with Vardis. Vardis had basically hit him in the mouth face region with his shield, and Tyrion notes that riding hard in the dark is a good way to break their necks. If their horses fail this time, they will be screwed, which Tyrion is completely right on. Tyrion then lastly notes he believes that the mountain clans will find them regardless and might already have, which is a great point, right? The mountain clans, these are their homes, right? They have home field advantage. It's kind of like when you see the Dornish, right? And when they're fighting Aegon the Conqueror or any of the other Targaryens that end up invading, it's very similar where you're trying to hide in places that they already know where you're going to try and hide at, right? They have been trying to feast on passengers and stealing from them for decades. So again, not a great plan. You can't stay out of their sight. You're gonna be found. Bronn then suggests then that they are dead men, which in reality is kind of how it looks at this point. But Tyrion replies, if so, he plans to die warm and with food in his belly to lift their spirits. But unfortunately, Lysa did not provide them with good food, which is, you know, a Lysa thing to do. You're sending them to their death. Least you could do is give them one nice meal. But luckily, Bronn can hunt and find meat. But again, Tyrion's logic here is pretty sound, right? If this is going to be your last time on this earth, might as well spend it, you know, in a decent, spend it decently, you know, having some decent food, having warmth, not shivering in the dark with your belly hungry. If you're going to die, you know, at least go out with a little bit of happiness. But Bronn looks at Tyrion suspiciously with his dark hair and eyes and says that he should leave Tyrion to his fool's fire and take his horse, and he would double his chances to survive, and asks what Tyrion would do then. Again, not a great plan. Even if Bronn did this, it's still very likely that Bronn wouldn't get very far. But maybe, I mean, it does double his chances, so I do see Bronn's logic, I guess, even though I don't think he's actually serious. But Tyrion notes he would die most like, but Bronn is not convinced, saying that you don't think I would do it. And Tyrion responds, if you meant to, if it meant your life, you would. But Tyrion notes how Bronn was quick to kill Chicken when he was hit with an arrow. Again, the whole idea here is that even Bronn notes that, like, he's not going to survive, even if he takes Tyrion's horse. So it just, it's a better outcome for Bronn to stay with Tyrion, someone that he knows he can benefit off of, than just die regardless. So I think that's the thing. And I think Bronn already realizes that Tyrion has some sort of plan. He's acting way too relaxed. But Bronn responds that his moaning was bringing them on, and Chicken would have done the same. And this is interesting because we figure out here that Bronn had actually lied to Catelyn. So again, already that disloyalty was there kind of from the start, and Catelyn was right to be wary of Bronn. But it also brings up this interesting idea where it's like, Bronn is someone that is willing to do things that are kind of ugly, kind of dark, for his own betterment, and maybe even the greater good. I don't know if you would call it the greater good, because if, you know, Chicken had kept, you know, making more noise and drawing them to them, could have resulted in all of them dying. So again, it's one of those things where you kind of look at, for instance, in my opinion, Maegor for the Targaryen dynasty, where at times he did actions that were bad, but they were, I guess, for the right reason, maybe, in their own justification is kind of how I would go with that. And also something else here that Bronn points out is that Chicken was not a friend. He was a riding companion, you know, again, traveling in, you know, numbers is always better. And lastly, Bronn states he fought for Tyrion, but does not love him. And Tyrion already knows all of this. Tyrion's not stupid, but it is something to, again, show that Bronn is someone that doesn't really have a lot of actual friends, companionship. He is someone that is willing to use people for his benefit. Again, it's Bronn is much more honest than most people when it comes to that kind of line of work, or how people even view themselves, right? Cersei is someone that is kind of denies all of the things Bronn is talking about. Like, Cersei is someone that definitely uses people to her own advantage, and at certain points she doesn't even like realize she does that, or she isn't honest with herself that that's basically who she is. She's not a great moral person, and Bronn doesn't really pretend to do so. So that's something that makes Bronn much more fascinating, because he's a character that's blatantly pretty honest, right? He's someone that kind of tells it how it is, even though it's kind of funny because he did lie to Catelyn, but still, you gotta get what I'm saying, right? But Tyrion then responds, it was his sword that Tyrion had needed, not his love. Bronn asks how he knew he would fight for him, and Tyrion awkwardly notes it was a roll of the dice, and to be fair, his best chance. Again, Tyrion had no other option, right? Like, what was Tyrion going to do? He couldn't go back to the sky cells. He would have starved, or eventually he would have rolled off the cell. He was going to die if that was going to happen. There was also no way in hell that Tyrion was going to be found innocent given an actual trial. So he had to really just throw a dart against a dartboard blind and hope that Bronn was going to pick up on it. And there's a couple things you could have looked at. Tyrion had a fairly decent relationship with Bronn, and Bronn, again, seeing opportunity, it makes sense why Tyrion did this, and it was his best choice, even though it wasn't the most likely choice. Tyrion notes that all the others had captured him for honor or loyalty, but not Bronn and Chicken. So why them? Well, for gold and rewards. That is what all sellswords want. Bronn was hoping that Cat would either take her into her service or pay him well, which again makes complete sense. Think about most people in this world that are not upper class, or I guess like knights, or, you know, have a place like that. That's what a lot of people are going to do if you offer them benefits. That's why Tyrion is able to, again, especially in this like book, influence so many people with the wealth of House Lannister. Think about Mord, think about the Mountain Clans, is what that's going to do. It's just something that, you know, you're able to do when you have all of these riches. And at this point, Tyrion is also trying to light the fire with very little success. But he continues stating that this is where they went wrong, or this is where he and Chicken had went wrong. Starks are all honorable and just, and Bronn and Chicken are not. She would have found a coin or two for them, but never into her service, as they are both low-born scum. Again, and Bronn's not even going to like go away from this, right? He knows that's what he is. It's, again, not understanding who these highborn lords and ladies are. And that's something that we're going to see even with the next Ned chapter, where the common folk just don't know these things about the high lords and the high ladies, right? And Tyrion, again, is going to be able to pick that out where Bronn isn't. Bronn then notes that Tyrion has a bold tongue, and once again, we get more foreshadowing. We get a lot of foreshadowing in this first book, that Tyrion may lose his tongue one day. Tyrion even notes that everyone keeps telling him that. So is this foreshadowing that Tyrion will eventually lose his tongue? Maybe, maybe not. For me personally, I don't think it's going to happen, but it could. It's just foreshadowed way too many times for me to discount the possibility. Tyrion continues explaining that once they reached the Eyrie, Cat had no further use of him, but Tyrion did. Tyrion rolled the dice, hoping Bronn would know the reputation of the Lannisters having gold, and Bronn did catch on, as once again, Tyrion fails to start the fire. Again, it's just showing the advantages and disadvantages of, again, Catelyn, for instance, right? Where she is someone that definitely has more of this highborn privilege, as in, she is someone that is not going to put as much value in someone like Bronn, where someone like Tyrion, who's willing to get dirty, to, you know, play the political game in a way that people that are honorable and maybe, you know, just would not do. And Tyrion sees the value in people like Bronn, like Chicken, like the Mountain Clans. This is really what a lot about his book 2 arc is going to kind of be about, is how he plays the Game of Thrones, and just showing that difference between someone like Tyrion and Catelyn. And that'll get us into page 455. And something else I want to notice, as we're, switching page numbers, is that Catelyn didn't necessarily play the Game of Thrones wrong. It was really that she got thwarted by Lysa. So I think, Catelyn has a lot of fault in what ended up happening at the Vale and the Eyrie specifically. But once she had made the decision to go to the Eyrie, all of the bad decisions after that were kind of on Lysa, right? It was Catelyn making the bad initial decisions to, 1, capture Tyrion, and then 2, go to the Eyrie. But moving into page 455. At this last fruitless attempt, Bronn says he will do it and instantly starts the fire, again showing how resourceful Bronn is. Tyrion notes that he may be scum, but he is useful, and with a sword in hand, he may be as good as his brother Jaime, which, a lot of flattery here from Tyrion, because that's not even close to the case, but, he asks Bronn what he wants: women, land, riches, and if he stays with him, he will get them all. Bronn notes, what if he dies? Tyrion says, you have one sincere mourner, as when he dies, the gold runs out. Which is a very clever line, and I think it shows really how Tyrion does feel about his life. Something we're going to get to, I think it's one of the most notable things in A Storm of Swords with Tyrion and Sansa's relationship, especially in the Purple Wedding chapter, is Tyrion feels very alone. He is someone that is not loved by his family outside of Jaime, and even Jaime and Tyrion's relationship is quite messed up. And that loneliness drives him into a relationship with someone like Shay. And that's going to be a pivotal part of this story, this chapter specifically, and his story going forward. So that's something that's, you know, it's a nice little like thing that's mentioned here. But it's not, you know, overly expanded upon because it's something that's going to be built upon later in the books. Bronn says that this is fair enough and says that he is his man, but don't expect him to go bending the knee or calling him milord. Tyrion notes he is no man's friend, and he has no doubt that he would sell him out like he did Cat if he saw the opportunity to. And Tyrion reminds him that if he's ever tempted to betray him, remember, Tyrion will always pay double, which is an interesting thought, right? Again, just based upon the Lannisters have more gold and things, but the big problem is going to come, what happens when you go against another Lannister, right? Where that Lannister has all the riches you do, but maybe even more, right? Like if Tywin comes to you and is like, oh, betray Tyrion, Bronn wouldn't bat an eye. And that's something Tyrion probably has to kind of understand at this point. But for the most part, you know, Tyrion has the right of that. And he finally asks if Bronn can do something about supper. Bronn then goes to find supper as Tyrion tends the horses, and 1 hour later, there is a young goat on the fire, cooking, which made Tyrion's mouth water. Again, think about it like this. Tyrion actually hasn't had a good meal since way before he got captured at the Crossroad Inns. I mean, think about it, right? He was on the run through getting to the Eyrie, and then once you get to the Eyrie, well, now he's a prisoner and he was being starved. You can imagine how hungry Tyrion is at this point. Tyrion notes now all we need is some good wine to wash it down, but Bronn says that and a woman, and more swords about them. But Bronn says he will take the first watch for all the good it will do, but Tyrion thinks, why bother? They're probably going to get there before they even go to sleep. Which is interesting because they have had this fire going for an hour, and something they're going to discuss in the next, I think, page, but why haven't the Mountain Clans, like, attacked them yet? Right? They obviously know where they are. Like a fire at this point where people just do not do that. It's going to be basically a flare. Anyone in the area, hey, come kill us. And that's something we're going to discuss in the next page as to why that might be. That moves us into page 456. Bronn notes that Tyrion has a plan in which Tyrion agrees, but says it is another roll of the dice. And Bronn notes, except with our lives. And honestly, if Bronn is really thinking about it, Tyrion's already done this. He rolled the dice with his own life, and then Bronn, by getting involved, rolled the dice with his own life, going against someone as esteemed as Vardis. So, you know, we're just doing it twice. What's the bother? You know, you already rolled on it once, you know, might as well get lucky a second time. And at this, now this is an important line, guys. So I want you guys to remember, this is probably the most important line that I've covered in the first book so far. And, you know, I've always said this channel was named by someone else, and we're going to have a rebrand here. Whenever anybody asks me why the channel is named The Grease Goblins, it's going to be because of this next, like, paragraph. At this, Tyrion takes a strip of meat off the goat, and grease trickles down his mouth and chin. So, the Grease Goblins actually, in reality, was named after Bronn and Tyrion eating this young goat because it was nice and greasy. So there's the origin of the channel. If anyone ever asks me ever again, that will be it. I noted that when I was doing my notes, and I found that so funny. But Tyrion notes he could do better with seasoning, but he will not complain. If he was still at the Eyrie, he would be fighting over beans. And Bronn notes, yet you still gave the turnkey a bag of coins. Which is true. Tyrion could have just said, screw Mord. He could have said, as soon as he got free, he could have said, yeah, Mord, you got played. And I think Tyrion, to a degree, not only is he trying to, again, keep his word and all of that, but I think Tyrion almost pities Mord to a degree, because, again, one of the things we noted about Mord in Tyrion's last chapter was that Mord was someone that had been tricked quite a lot. Mord was not a smart person. He seemed like maybe he had some learning disabilities. And I think Tyrion, to a degree, saw a lot of the same things he's discriminated about in Mord. And I think that could have been something else that we look at there with why Tyrion would have also paid Mord. But Tyrion notes he always pays. Mord could hardly believe when he had been given the gold from Tyrion. His eyes had gone wide. Tyrion had kept the silver as that was not promised, but offered that if he ever got tired of being in service to Lysa, to present himself to Casterly Rock, and he will get the rest, which is obviously a lie. Like, think about this. Let's say you're Mord, and you go all the way to Casterly Rock, the entire other side of the continent, and you show up at Casterly Rock, and you're like, yeah, the Tyrion, the imp man promised me more gold. It's not happening, buddy. Unless Tyrion is personally there, it ain't happening. So maybe it was meant as a good thing from Tyrion, or to even just to weaken the Eyrie, but yeah, a little bit of a lie, a little bit of a fib. But Tyrion also notes that this is more gold than Mord could hope to make in a lifetime of abusing prisoners, which is pretty true. Bronn, eating meat himself, asks what Tyrion will do if we reach the river. And Tyrion notes, for a start, a woman, a featherbed, and some wine. After that, he will either go to Casterly Rock or King's Landing, because he has some questions about a certain dagger. And that's going to be an interesting plot line. Tyrion doesn't really ever, like, fully investigate this dagger. It almost kind of feels like a dropped plot a little bit with Tyrion, because he's so, like, at this point, fit in, okay, who set him up, that again, we get a little bit of it in Clash, like there's a little bit of that, you know, investigation. But if Tyrion had really put it together, it would be interesting. If Tyrion had kind of fully put it together, it would have been interesting. Like, we know that Tyrion, again, has his suspicions that it was Joffrey, and he kind of figures out that it was probably Littlefinger that lied about this, but it's something he doesn't really put his full investigation skills into it, just because he had so much other things going on, preparing for a siege and trying to figure out who was loyal and all these other things. But it is interesting. Bronn then notes that he was telling the truth then, that the dagger was not his. And Tyrion responds with a smile, saying, "Do you take me for a liar?" And at this, night comes over them, and Tyrion stretches his cloak out to sleep. Now, one thing I do want to point out, I know Tyrion is just jesting here with Bronn, but it is something that Tyrion does quite a lot, that he almost wants people to not view him in a great way. It's something we talk about with his advice to Jon of, you know, not shrinking away from being a bastard. Tyrion is the same way, but I think he takes it too far, right? He makes so many enemies because he plays into what people think of him already, and that's really such a big part of his character arc, especially when you look at his speech at the trial for Joffrey's death. It's something that I think Tyrion almost takes too much of that advice with him. And that leads us to page 457. Tyrion then notes that the mountain clans are taking their time, to which Bronn says they probably fear a trap, which does make quite a lot of sense, given it's like, there's two guys that seem to have no fear about lighting a fire. It seems suspicious. Like, are there more men around? Are they luring in the mountain clans? I definitely do understand why they would be wary. But Tyrion then says we should sing to scare them away as he begins to hum. Bronn again calls him mad. Again, you would think the logical thing is stay quiet, but at this point they've already like announced where they are. And Tyrion asks, where is his love of music? Where is it gone? And Bronn says he should have picked Marillion if he wanted music. And Tyrion notes how amusing that would be, but no, as he continues humming and sees if Bronn knows the song. He had heard it in many inns and whorehouses. He notes Mirish the seasons of my love. Sweet and sad, it was a song sang when he met his first woman. Tyrion notes the sky and the stars, and notes it was a night like this. So we're finally going to get to really a ton more of Tyrion's character arc. This is kind of the big chapter where it's not a giant chapter when you look at page count, but it does so much for Tyrion's character arc. Again, it's one of those chapters where, think about it, not a lot's really happening. It's just Tyrion and Bronn having a conversation until like the very end. And we just get so much about Tyrion through this chapter. And I feel like, for me personally, Tyrion is a weird POV in this first book because he almost, for the first couple chapters, doesn't really feel like he's in the spotlight. He doesn't really feel like he gets his full amount of time to develop. So, for instance, you know, in the first couple chapters, he's kind of with Jon, and it's kind of about really developing Jon's character arc, helping Jon along the way. And then now have the Catelyn arc, and it kind of feels like it's like 50-50 on like Cat and like Tyrion. And now we kind of finally have him really taking complete control over the POV. And I think this is definitely, if not his best, probably his second best chapter for me of the book so far, for Tyrion as a character specifically. Jaime and Tyrion had been traveling back from Lannisport when they heard a girl scream and saw two men after her. Jaime went after the men, but Tyrion dismounted to comfort the girl. She was a girl only a year older than him, but slender, black-haired girl with a beautiful face. She was low-born, unwashed, half-starved, and half her clothes had been torn off, so Tyrion had put his cloak around her as Jaime chased them into the woods. Again, something I think that's interesting when we look at Jaime, lying, or what Tyrion believes is lying, that he had made up this whole story and this had all been just so Tyrion could lose his virginity and all that. It's something to show that Jaime had a lot of actual anger towards these people. It's interesting that Tyrion doesn't look back on this and actually figure it out himself, because just Jaime's actual actions and rationale, Jaime's not that great of an actor. So it is interesting that Tyrion never really kind of figured this out, that Tysha actually wasn't a whore. But by the time Jaime had come back, Tyrion had gotten her name and a story from her, that she was a crofter's daughter and her father had died, leaving her orphaned. She had been traveling to, well, nowhere really, because she had nowhere to go. Jaime, ever being the hero, saw this as an insult, as bandits were never seen this close to the rock, and went back to Casterly Rock to get more men to hunt them down. The girl was frightened, and so Tyrion had offered to escort her to the nearest inn and feed her. And again, we see a lot of Tyrion's kindness, and it's something that's definitely there for Tyrion, is that Tyrion is someone that feels bad for the weak, for the people that have some sort of disorders, where you look at Bran being a cripple, or how I talked about with Mord and Jon even specifically. He is someone that pities the weak, people that are preyed upon. And that's something that we see directly in Tyrion's character, because Tyrion is, well, he is that, right? He is not physically capable, and people have talked down on him, made fun of him his entire life. I just, got done doing my Harrenhal video about Robert's Rebellion, and one of the things that is such a pivotal point is that when Jaime goes into the Kingsguard, Tyrion is then offered to Lysa, because Tyrion is now the heir to Casterly Rock. And so Tywin tries to marry Tyrion to Lysa, and Hoster Tully basically laughs in Tywin's face because of who Tyrion is. He's not as a masculine dude who's really tall and muscular and handsome. He's deformed. And so that's something I think that really plays into Tyrion's character. But Tyrion notes that she was hungrier than he would have believed, as they had finished 2 whole chickens together. The Hound would be quite pleased, but I think the Hound could eat all of the chickens, so they got some work to do. But that'll get us into page 458. Tyrion notes that he was only 13, and the flagon of wine had gone to his head, and he never knew how he got the courage to, but then he was in bed with her, and took her maidenhead as she kissed him, and by the morning he was in love. Can you imagine this happening at 13? We talk about Jon. Jon is really drunk for the first time, and I think it's his first chapter. And think about this with Tyrion. He's now meeting the first girl in his life. This is just a wild time for Tyrion. But, let's continue. And this seems very surprising to Bronn, how this whole story kind of goes, which again makes a lot of sense given how young Tyrion was and just who he is. Tyrion says yes, and that he even married her, which comes as even more of a surprise, because Bronn asks, how did you manage that? Surely a Lannister cannot be marrying a crofter's daughter. Now, notice how Bronn picks up on that, because it's going to be a pivotal part of the Shae and Tyrion storyline, where it's Bronn is saying Shae is just a whore, just set her aside. But that is not the case. That's not how Tyrion rolls. But Tyrion notes that it was not that hard. You just needed a drunk septon, some lies, and to be rich. It was eventually done, and Tyrion dared not bring her home, but set her up in a cottage. And they played man and wife for a day until the septon sobered up and revealed all to Tywin. Again, it just shows Tyrion was 13. He wasn't really thinking this stuff through. How are you going to hide Tysha? She was going to get revealed at some point. And again, you also look at the idea of love blinding, and that's something that's very apparent in this series. So yeah, just some nice little parallels to a lot of the themes in the story. But at this, Tyrion is surprised by how desolate he feels towards this memory and admits that this was the end of his marriage. Again, pointing again to how lonely Tyrion does feel, and that's something that's very apparent when you look at his marriage with Sansa. Bronn asks, so he sent her away, and Tyrion says he did better than that. He made it a lesson. Jaime admitted it was all a setup. We know, again, from Storm of Swords, that that was not the case, and paid for everything, and that Tysha was a whore, and Jaime paid more for a maiden. After Jaime had driven the lesson home, Tywin bade all of his guards to have sex with her, and all paid her a silver, while Tyrion watched on. This really shows how cruel Tywin is, right? Like, Tyrion's 13. He just, had his first, crush, his first love, and you do this to him. You completely destroy your son's entire world. And, it's even more awful when you look at Tywin himself, how big of a hypocrite he is, because we know he does this exact same thing. And it almost feels like Tywin just hates that aspect of himself, so he punishes Tyrion for it. And yeah, Tyrion has to watch on as all of these men basically sleep with the woman he loves. It's just terrible. And he then, just to top it all off, makes Tyrion go last and pays her a gold coin because Lannisters were worth more. Again, more of that elitist stuff from Tywin as always. While Tyrion was saying this, he turned from this fire, staring into the darkness. Again, Tyrion hasn't gotten over this. He hasn't forgotten what his father did to him. And there's kind of a hole in his soul, his heart, because of what happened. There was an uneasy silence until Bronn continued sharpening his sword and notes it did not matter how many men had been there, he would have killed the man who did that to him. And Tyrion told him he may get that chance. And this is great character building and or writing for what is going to happen in Storm of Swords. The entire trial, the entire setup for, having Tyrion be the fall guy for Joffrey's, murder, and having his own father condemn him. It's just these subtle stories, these subtle moments that George does that makes those moments later on in the third book so rewarding. And it's one of the things we praise Storm of Swords so much, but it's these moments that were set up in the first book that make those moments so great. And Tyrion even continues saying that the Lannisters always pay their debts. He then says he was going to try and sleep and to wake him if anything happened. After a time, he fell asleep and dreamed of his sky cell, but this time he was the goaler and not the prisoner, and he was hitting his father, Tywin. Again, showing that power dynamic that Tywin has kind of had over Tyrion, where he's just constantly beating him up for every single thing, and someday that will change. But at this, Tyrion is woken up by Bronn with his sword and dirk in hand. Their fire was growing low, but Tyrion could see the shadows moving in. Tyrion tries to get Bronn to lower his weapons and welcomes them to their fire. They have no wine, but they have goat. At this, the movement stops, and a voice says, "Our mountain, our goat." Tyrion says, "Your goat," confirming this. And who is he? A different voice responds, saying, "When you go to meet your gods, tell him it was Gunther, son of the Stormcrows, who sent you." Tyrion notes he is a thin man armed with a long knife. At this, Shagga of Dolph also introduces himself, as he was the first voice. Shagga is seen as being a huge man with a club and axe in his hands. Others say their names, too many to remember, but there was about 10, and all armed pretty poorly with pitchforks and such. And even the ones that had actual weapons, they were very blunted steel, rotting steel, not great. And so you look at all of this, and I think Tyrion instantly understands that his plan could work. These are people that are just trying to survive, right? And they're, constantly being in conflict with the Knights of the Vale, the Eyrie, and they're not doing so good. That's something Tyrion is going to use against them. Tyrion introduces himself as Tyrion, son of Tywin, of Clan Lannister, and he will pay for the goat they ate. Gunther then asks, how will they pay him? Tyrion notes their weapons would fit well with the men and their silver in their purse. But this is not good enough. Again, Khan, one of the other men, responds saying, you're paying us with their own coin. Again, these men can take all of this. What is Tyrion going to offer them outside of what they have on them? Because they're just going to take that anyway, right? So it is the Mountain Clans being kind of smart. Like, you can't pay us with stuff we're going to take from you anyway. So, again, very smart thinking. Shaga agrees with Khan and asks Tyrion how he would like to die. And Tyrion has his iconic line. He would like to die in his own bed with a belly full of wine and a maiden's mouth around his cock at the age of 80. Shaga laughs and says to take their horses, kill Bronn, and take Tyrion to milk the goats and make the mothers laugh. Bronn is not willing to lay down his life and die, and asks, and who is first? Again, can't blame Bronn here. Can't blame Bronn. Tyrion then yells no, and says that his house is rich and powerful, and if the Mountain Clans help them get through the high road, they would be showered with gold. Again, Tyrion playing on what people want to hear. These are, again, we saw this with Mord in the last Tyrion chapter. Greed is something that almost all men have to a degree. And the more desperate the situation, the more people will probably want those things to elevate their position. Tyrion is just playing into that perfectly, understanding his role. Gunther brings up a good point. Gold is useless to them right now, and they cannot trust Tyrion's promises to begin with, which is great, right? It's a very human thing. It's like you have some dude who's promising you all this gold with a knife held to his throat. He's going to say anything to get out of it. That's something we also see throughout the series. How do they trust Tyrion? But Tyrion plays off of their pride, saying that at least he faces his enemies. The Mountain Clans hide every time the Knights of the Vale go by. This gets a reaction. You're basically calling them cowards and weak. It's going to get a reaction, which is exactly what Tyrion even wants, though. This gets a reaction from them, but Tyrion stands his ground, saying, are these the best weapons you could steal? They are fit for killing sheep, if the sheep do not fight back. He says that his father's smith shits better steel. Shaga is angered even further and asks if he'll mock him when he cuts off his manhood and feeds it to the goats. A line I would like to say that me and my friends quote quite often. It's such a good line. I don't know why. Just cut off his manhood and feed it to the goats. It's just a nice line. I would highly recommend if there's ever a tense situation, just say that. But at this, Shaga silences him, saying he wants to hear what Tyrion has to say. As steel is better than gold, and the mothers do go hungry. What will Tyrion give them? Swords, lances, and mail? Tyrion says all and more, but even further, he will give them the Vale. That's a very big promise, given that all of these people are armored very lightly. It's pretty difficult to actually take the Vale in general, but it works. Tyrion plays on their greed of wanting more, and in these people's situations, right, it seems like they're really struggling and even to just feed themselves. So a big promise is like this from Tyrion, and you have him captive, so you do have the means to get this reward. You can see why Tyrion has this plan. It's a pretty good one, and it does end up working out, as we will see in the upcoming chapters. But again, pretty short chapter like I talked about. I hope you guys all enjoyed. We will be back in the next chapter being Ned. I believe it's 11. Ned 11 is going to be him basically on the throne and dealing with some of the stuff going on in the Riverlands. So thank you guys all for watching, and I hope you guys all enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.